Good day, everybody. So, as you guys will see on my Google Maps screen, which you're looking at, is a overhead shot of Fort Sumter, and I'll let you folks be the judge of why this picture is displayed. So, moving forward a little bit here, I have decided to. Well, I'm not going to say I've decided. I have been writing a book about the Second American Civil War. And obviously it's a work of fiction that may at some point intermingle reality. But who knows? Hopefully not. But the premise of the book is going to be after the Civil War, and it will happen many years after the Civil War has taken place. And the main character is going to be a historian who is trying to document a very factual history book about the Second American Civil War. In this book, in terms of what the historian is attempting to collate, is about the battles and maybe not so much about the why, because the why, as you will find out as he travels across the fragmented continent of the United States, which will now be broken up into a variety of independent, semi-independent states, city-states, and even counties in some cases. But again, he travels around trying to gain understanding of just the of the war itself, what happened, and he attempts to write that. He will be interviewing commanders, people who before the war you would not think would be commanding anything, who became battlefield commanders, military leaders before and after the war. Some of these will be in prison, others won't. They would be interviewing the children of slain leaders and participants, combatants in the war. But that's the idea, and I've been doing this for a bit now. But I'm still working on a title. So any suggestions of a working title or something that would inspire readers? I'm really open to anything. I've got some ideas, obviously, but realistically, if this ever happens, and what I mean by if this, and that's an actual second civil conflict in the United States. First off, why would it happen? Well, I think there's many reasons, but I think ultimately, as I have suggested in other videos, I think the reasons would look a lot like what happened in Spain. It would be right versus left. But within the context of that right versus left, there would be reasons behind that. A person would just not say, well, they may say, I'm a conservative, I'm right-leaning, or vice versa. So you would have obviously people who would identify as either being conservative, right-leaning. The left would declare themselves probably progressive, liberal, democratic, that sort of identifier. But what would it be about? It would, what would be the main causes? Well, so again, those main causes would kind of come down to what we're looking at now. You would have that ultimate fragment of right versus left, but inside that right versus left, you would have everything from politics to how laws are interpreted and executed, in terms of everything from abortion on the religious right and on the left. It's a very sensitive topic, but at the same time, there's persons on the right in which that's not a deal breaker. It's just not something they would probably go to war for. But at the same time, that person may have very significant opinions about gun rights. The race question comes into play. Would it be a race war? Well, I think it would have elements of race. And the reason I believe that is because right now there are three groups of people who kind of identify to one of these three groups, and that's Caucasian, white, black, or Hispanic, and then obviously there's a growing Asian population, so that would actually be fourth, and where that would come into play, I don't know. But right now, first starting with Americans of African descent, a very large portion of that group identifies with the left. Now, they may not have all the same attributes as a white leftist, but there are significant issues that, for some reason, the Americans of African descent, based on voting, seem to gravitate towards the left. The Hispanic population, the Latino population. Now this gets much more complicated, because there are many Latinos, Hispanics, that share conservative values, and at the same time, many of these folks are Catholic, right? So abortion is something that is not something that they would go along with. But when the tide and fervor of a civil war start, sometimes it's just that, like a tide, and you kind of get swept up into it. So that would be a very complicated issue for the Latino and Hispanic community. And then obviously the whites. The Caucasians tend to be, that support the left, tend to be located in very large cities that have attended and have been indoctrinated by a college, university, and their opinions are really nurtured by those experiences. So if you were to go to an area in a big city that is mostly white, and then you were to go to, say, for instance, an area just outside of Branson, Missouri, Well, I can tell you the culture is much different. When you go from, say, Branson and the areas near northern Arkansas, obviously not in Springfield itself, but you can't really include that. But just it's light and day. It's night and day. It's you just can't. There's this disassociation. This, I think, if you go to Branson and then you go to, say, Los Angeles, it's almost like watching the Hunger Games, and not from a poverty point of view, but just how culturally different people are in Branson, Missouri versus Los Angeles. It's crazy how much we have fragmented. But ultimately, it's going to be this cultural divide. It is going to be just a host of issues that is really a non-starter for any group. If one group would say, yeah, I completely support a wall along the southern border, then you would have another group, well, I completely oppose a wall along the southern border. You're a racist. And, it's just, and again, obviously I am speaking from the point of a person who is on the right. So I fully understand that I could not give a full, unobstructed optic of someone who is on the left, or what I would define as deep left, because I don't understand it. I can't get my head around it. I've tried to, and I think that's kind of where we're at. Is I am not going to accept it, and I can't get my head around it. And at the same time, those persons on the left can't either. And I would say there is probably less actual cultural immersion that takes place on the left than on the right. I think people who tend to live in rural areas, such as this on my map, will travel to Los Angeles or San Diego or some other big city, and they'll experience it. But most of the time, a person on the left living in San Francisco, San Diego, Portland, Seattle, this is just flyover country. It's you don't go there to spend time. And what I mean by that is actually go there, spend significant amount of time, and try to understand the viewpoint of another group. The left likes to say they celebrate diversity, but what is diversity? They don't celebrate anything as far as I'm concerned in terms of this area of the country. But again, back to the book, I think that any actual fighting would probably actually start inside of states that are extreme left-leaning, because within California and within Washington, within Oregon, are whole counties that gravitate towards very conservative viewpoints and do not agree with this leftist monopoly on violence, the limitations of freedom and speech. And California, for instance, would probably turn on some of its own counties, which would lead to fighting inside of said counties, say in California. At the same time, If you kind of swing out towards the Midwest, Denver, Colorado is becoming a bastion of leftism. So you may have support coming in from, say, California and Oregon in terms of the bigger cities, the counties that surround the around Los Angeles, San Jose, San Francisco, supporting Marxists and leftists, quote-unquote progressives, inside of Denver. As you leave Denver, there has been even pushes by Weld County in northeastern Colorado to succeed from Colorado itself. And if you go out towards western Colorado, in the rural areas, the thoughts of what are occurring in Denver are much, much different. They are diametrically opposed to each other. And that's the fragment. It's not a complete state that would be completely conservative or leftist. But as this war starts to take place, you would see peoples being driven out of states because of their thought, because of their politics. So you could eventually see, for instance, in Missouri, you could see areas of St. Louis and Kansas City and possibly Springfield that are people from the left are displaced. You would see people in California who are conservative but are heavily outnumbered that could become displaced because of militant action on both sides of the equation.